Hi, my name is Victoria Bauer, and I chose to do the graphic novel called March by John Lewis. Other contributors were Andrew Aiden and Nate Powell. Nate Powell did do the graphics. I did choose this book specifically because it was a graphic novel. My nephew is very into graphic novels, and he's in middle school right now, and so this is basically a template that I thought would really reach out to him, and I thought that this would be a good way to kind of introduce the topic of segregation and civil rights movement and things like that to him. I have talked to him briefly about it, but he is homeschooled, so we do try and, do additional lessons for him. And so I thought that this would be a good way to introduce him to some things. The summary is basically this is a graphic novel that depicts flashback stories of John Lewis and his participation in the civil rights movement. I do think that John Lewis is a figure that is not as well known in regards to the civil rights movement, as well as people like Jim Lawson and a few others that are mentioned. He is actually telling this story to children, telling the story of basically his life to some children that come into his office, like present day John Lewis's office. And the mom wants them to know their history, and so he basically starts talking to them about how he tended to chickens. And that escalates into how he wanted to be a preacher. And then eventually his uncle Otis notices him and realizes that there's something special about him, there's something unique about him. And so he takes him to, I believe it's New York, and he kind of sees a world that he's not used to because he is from rural Alabama, as the picture says, and he is just not used to the way that black people and white people kind of live a little bit more harmoniously together. In New York, there obviously is still segregation, but he's able to do a lot of things in New York that he would never be able to do in Alabama. As he says here, when he was younger, there was no civil rights movement, but he wanted to work at something. He wanted to be involved in something. And while he did start off with wanting to be a preacher, he eventually kind of basically adapted. And I would say he even used those preaching skills because he did eventually become a preacher. He used those preaching skills to, amplify his voice in this movement. He learns about the Brown versus the Board of Education and their decision that it is unconstitutional to segregate people because there is no such thing as separate but equal with the way things are run. He also learns about MLK, Rosa Parks, Emmett Till. He meets MLK at one point when he's talking about going to an all-white college and desegregating it. MLK is willing to back him, the lawyers are willing to back him, but unfortunately he ultimately decides that it's just too risky for his family. He briefly mentions Emmett Till's death and how that was a big impact on the world as a whole, whites and blacks. And he even mentions how the murderers were found not guilty and then later bragged about doing it. There is a large chunk of it that focuses on his participations in the sit-ins, and he ends up becoming a major part of SNCC. Overall, he's a very important speaker for the movement, and he wholly supported MLK's ideals behind nonviolent protesting. One of the major scenes in this graphic novel is when he just talks about when they do demonstrations and talk about how the different ways that they could be treated. And so they have white people, they have black people, and they stand in for different positions and basically demean each other, belittle each other, just talk a bunch of smack, get in each other's faces, to just test their limits to see how much they can take and to see if they can really do it. And some of them can't, and they admit that. But I would say it's just a very big deal that somebody who comes from the lifestyle that he comes from, where his family was very much a, stay out of the way, don't get in trouble, don't do anything too dangerous. And he ends up becoming such a prominent figure for basically not staying out of the way, making waves, making a big deal about things that need to be addressed. My evaluation for this book, one of the things that I found most shocking was how much information it had. Being a graphic novel, you think, oh, it's all pictures, there's very little words, there's just not too much to it. Which I would wholly disagree with. I thought, considering that, even though there were a lot of pictures, and this wasn't a fairly long book, there was a lot of information, and there was a lot of things that I think are addressed in a lot of history classes, the major movements. Like I said, I don't think a lot of people know who John Lawson is himself, or Jim Lawson, or John Lewis, but you still see those other major movements like Rosa Parks, the Montgomery bus boycott, MLK's I Have a Dream speech, all these different things. And I think a lot of the times people think that these things are super spaced apart. They think that they're, over such a long period of time, but they're really not. It's a very short amount of time, as you can see, because all of these things happen just in Jim Lawson's lifetime. And a lot of them happen, when he's a little bit older, until, like MLK is shot, and finally segregation is considered outlawed. With the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that this story is probably even more relevant now than it has been for maybe many years, because I think for a long time people just kind of dealt with the way things were. And now there's beginning to be a shift. There's beginning to be, more movements again, because of the systemic racism and racism in general, and just the way that people are just getting sick and tired of not being treated equally. People need to see what African Americans were fighting for back then, so that they can understand that while we have come a long way, there is still more work to be done. We are nowhere near equal, and we can see that in a lot of different things. I think that this book in particular is very important, specifically for reaching to younger generations. These stories do need to be told to everyone, but the younger generations are the ones that are going to be able to really push for more change. Because a lot of the people now, they're very set in their ways, and they think that the way things are is just the way things will always be. So really reaching that younger generation and showing them the mistakes of our past, is really what's going to improve our country. I had a professor who used to always say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And I think that that's really true here. But I think that if we don't focus on what happened, and we don't accept what happened and accept that it was wrong, then we won't be able to improve, and we'll continue to repeat the same mistakes. These are some graphics that I took from the novel that I just thought were really powerful or really impactful. I thought that this one, with the different things about war and racism and just these pictures that went along with it, were just really powerful. I thought that this bit of information was really just very cool. I actually didn't know that they only had one person speak. And this specific time, it was Diane. Being a religious person myself, I really did resonate with this image, because it just really speaks to how the word just has become a part of him. It's just who he is. And I think a lot of that religiosity is the reason why he supports the nonviolent protests so much. This image, as well as this image over here, are just really powerful, because it's the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and this is where they're, just telling them this is an unlawful assembly, and they need to, split up. And I actually didn't put the one image in here where they talk about kneeling and praying, but just the fact that, these people are just standing here doing absolutely nothing, and yet they end up being attacked. I thought this one was really nice because of the impact that it has, talking about the younger generations. This one is just probably one of my favorites because it does actually take me back to the idea of slavery and how they used to sing songs then. This is also one of my favorites as an avid reader. And going back to the time of slavery, when slaves were just discouraged from reading, and it was even illegal to even teach slaves how to read. And this, African American library is telling these kids, like, read everything, just read it all, because it's best to be educated. So as I said, I read this story specifically because I wanted to be able to kind of link it with my nephew, which I already have talked to my sister about doing. I really recommend this book, especially to younger students. They might not love reading, so this is a good way, because I think the graphic novel genre is really growing. It's just, kind of booming right now, and I think kids really like this. They love comics and things like that, so this is basically just like an extended comic. Although this graphic novel doesn't go super in depth with the brutality that a lot of African Americans faced during the Civil Rights Movement, it's kind of a good starting point for many young readers. It's a fairly easy and quick read, and it's got lots of pictures, so it kind of puts things into their head. The story is laid out, like someone telling their grandkid the story of, John Lewis. But it's actually John Lewis telling the story. And so I think that that's really interesting. I also just think it's really entertaining and kind of adorable that he starts off just talking about the chickens. It's kind of a good way to get people engaged in the story. So, in summation, I just really liked this book. I thought it was excellent, and I will definitely be recommending it to future people.